Heavenly Father, may the words I'm about to speak bring praise to you. Amen. So it's wonderful to be here. I'm going to indicate to Michael when the slides come up in the usual way. I'm hoping Michael's going to forgive me because just before we kicked off here, I said, why don't we share the slides? And I completely messed with his setup on Zoom. But he's smiling at me, which suggests that he may have forgiven me. So let's go to the first slide there. Now, you've heard these stories before. It is chapter 1, the creation story, and then there's the story about the Israelites and the manna and quail in the desert. Children's stories. Stories we've all heard when we were tiny. What are we doing, grown-ups, listening to these stories anymore? Well, what I'm going to show you is that these stories have absolute bearing for us today, and they're incredibly exciting. And not only am I going to walk us through these two stories, but I'm going to show you a miracle. So if there's any bit of this in the next 10 minutes that makes you think, oh, he's blathering on, hold out, because there's a miracle at the very end of this that you are going to remember for the rest of your days. I promise you. So, the goal of the next 10 minutes, I am not a practiced, seasoned religious speaker. I am not trained in this. I am just like you. And just like you, I have every right to stand up here and share my views, and you have every right to disagree with them. The only aim of the next 10 minutes is that we take a step closer to God. That is all we're after. So if you disagree, fantastic, because it'll help us all think things through. I also shared what we're talking about with a friend, a colleague of mine, and he said, that's not a sermon, that's worship. And it was really interesting. So I'd like you to think about the next 10 minutes being about worship. At the end of this, I hope you're going to be blown away with the awe-inspiring awesomeness of the God that we have, because that is the message I want to share. So I stand before you as a scientist. Okay? I don't want to be boastful, but I feel I should set my authority here. So I trained as a scientist, did a science degree in the late 1980s, got a first-class degree in essentially biology and chemistry. I then went on and did a PhD in engineering. I spent 35 years working as a professional scientist. I've run teams of thousands of people, running businesses that turn over hundreds of millions of pounds. I was the youngest ever chartered person in my particular professional institution. I'm a good scientist, and I'm proud of that, but if I'm standing up here, I am not boasting in what my capabilities are. I'm boasting in the lack of knowledge I have. The older I get, the more I realize the less I know. And the only reason I've got any skills, any capabilities, because that is a gift from God, and that I will go to my grave celebrating on, because that ability to think through things was a gift from God. And I stand before you as a scientist because scientists love to pick holes in those stories. That quail story and that Genesis story, they love to pick holes in them. And what do scientists do? Well, they try and explain the world. We take the world and we try and set models to it and data, and we flex it around and we go, oh, we can explain everything. Science explains everything. We don't need God. We can explain it all. And then you get to this whole thing. Is it God or is it science? Can the universe be explained just by science? So now let's come back to chapter 1. We only read the first 3 verses because you know the story. We could have done the whole chapter, but you know the story. Here it is. There it is, pictorially. The earth being created. I think this is a wonderful story, and it does not refute anything that comes in science. This is a timeless story. This is a timeless story that was written so that it could be lasting through the ages, whether it was 3,000 years ago or 3,000 years further in the future. This story stands the test of time, because that description that we had, we've put words into it. We go, oh, it's a day. How can that possibly be in a day? The sun wasn't created until day 3 or 4. So what we traditionally think of as a day isn't a day. I personally don't believe it's a telling of the day by day. I personally believe that it fits perfectly with the story of evolution, and that evolution is in itself a glorious gift from God. What you've got here is a creation story that takes us from the Big Bang the nothingness of the universe all the way through to the glorious creation, the complexity of creation. Look at those pictures. Look at how they get more complicated. This is a timeless story that aligns absolutely with science. And it is done to inspire people. So it would have inspired you whether you were sitting inside a tent in an Egyptian forest, where'd I get that from? Desert. Or whether you're sitting on a spacecraft in 2022. This story stands the test of time. It aligns with creation. Basically, it's telling us that we have an awesome God. And actually, the far bigger question is why Earth? Because I want to take a few minutes, and just bear with me, this might feel like it's a science lesson, but to get across the awesomeness of God, we have to go on a little bit of a journey here. So, in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about a few numbers, and I'm going to mention light years, and it's worth just noting what a light year is. We often watch in the press, people talk about light years, and they think it's time. A light year is a distance. So that is 1 meter. A light year is a distance. It is the distance that light can travel in 1 year because of the speed of light. It takes 8 minutes for light to get to us from the sun. A 1 light year is 6 trillion miles. Another thing I'm going to talk about in numbers, millions, billions, and trillions. And just to help you get a sense of the scale of those, 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years. And 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. These numbers are bigger, bigger, bigger than anything we can ever get our heads around. Which is why when we come back to this story and we start talking about Genesis and God and it's this small world that we fit in, we forget how big the universe is. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm galloping through this because there's lots of stuff. So this is something we will all have seen. You were taught it at school. This is our solar universe, our solar system. And you have all the planets lined up terribly neatly in this glorious diagram. Actually, if we take... So if this was the sun, okay, the size of a football, this is the Earth. Actually, this isn't. This is still 10 times too big to be the Earth. The Earth should be a 2 millimeter sized ball. It shouldn't be here. It should be 23 meters away, essentially at the back of the hall. The moon would be a ball just like this, that's 63 centimeters away from this one, going around in a circle. We are specks of dust in the universe. Neptune, our furthest planet, would be 900 meters away. Essentially an epsom in the scale of this universe, with the Earth, with the sun, the size of a football. The next nearest star, Proxima Centauri, the nearest star to us would be in New York, 6,000 miles away. We are specks of dust. It's worth noting that our sun is a tiny sun. It's an immaterial sun in a galaxy. Let's go on to the next slide. In our galaxy, this is our galaxy, the Milky Way. This is obviously an artist's impression because we've never been able to get out of our galaxy. We'll never get out of our own solar system, but we do see it. Take the next photo. We can go to places where we look up in the sky and we see the Milky Way. Now, the Milky Way is a collection of about 200 billion stars, just like our star, but remember, our star is a tiny star. Ours is not a big star. It's a meaningless star. It's actually a star, next one, on the outer rim. We know, we can map these. We know our star is a tiny star on the outer rim of a particular galaxy that, if we're really lucky, we look up in the sky and we can see the Milky Way there. We can see the collection of stars and how they get more and more intense. We don't actually know what's in the center of the Milky Way, but we know we're part of this collection. So we have a solar system, which is ours, which is our sun and the planets, being part of a galaxy, and our galaxy is called the Milky Way. And the nearest star to us in that galaxy is Proxima Centauri, which is, on that scale, over in New York. Our galaxy, however, next slide, this is from the Hubble telescope, where they pointed the Hubble telescope at a tiny spot in the sky, the size of a 2p piece, if you position the 2p piece about 50 meters away, okay? And they pointed the Hubble telescope at that and just said, well, let's see what it can see. And this is what they saw. And it is trillions. Remember, a trillion seconds is 32,000 years. It is trillions of galaxies. And in each of those galaxies, there are billions of stars. Next slide. So we come back to this little blue marble, this tiny, precious earth that we live on. And when we take that Genesis story of creation, it's not a children's story. This is a story about how special this planet is. And just in case I hadn't got the point across, let's go to the next slide, because Earth is absolutely unique. Absolutely unique. It is just the right distance from the sun. If it was too much nearer, we'd be burning up, and too much further away, we'd be freezing cold. It's just the right size, because we've got a size that just about holds on to an atmosphere through the gravity. It's unique in that we've got an iron core, a molten iron core that's mixing around. That molten iron core is what gives us a magnetic field, and that magnetic field is what ensures that we don't lose our atmosphere through solar radiation. There are so many things that make you realize that this little speck of dust on an innocuous little planet, in an innocuous little galaxy, in a far distant reach corner of the global universe that God created, and we're on this planet, and we're cared for and loved for. This is an incredible place to be. I could talk for a very long time about this, but we're going to move on. So we now come, so having done, hopefully, given you some sense of the awe of creation and how small it is, let's come crashing down to earth to the second of these stories, the manna in the desert. Children's story, yeah? There they were, wandering through the desert. They're hungry, people are grumbling. If you read the whole chapter, it's a great chapter. Yeah, the Israelites are grumbling away, going, I'm hungry. Oh, it's the only thing that matters. I'm hungry. And God gives them food. Some of them get a bit greedy, take too much. It turns to maggots. So funny. On the Sabbath, they get to keep it for a second day. It's a wonderful miracle. It's a glorious miracle. But it's a children's story, right? Wouldn't happen today. Or imagine that you're there as part of that group. How many of you have been on holiday? I'm sure we've all been on holiday. You've gone to the buffet at the hotel. The first day, it's terribly exciting, isn't it? You find all the different things on the buffet. You've got the oatmeal, and you've got the orange juice, and you've got the people making omelettes, and you work out what it is. Second day, the excitement's down a bit, but you know where you're going. Third day, it's a routine. I think it was the same for the Israelites. I think on the first day, there was this awesomeness of, we've got quail and manna. God, the birds flew in. Second day, oh yeah, the birds flew in again. That was good, wasn't it? Third day, well, where are the birds? They're a bit late today. They turn up, and they got used to the birds coming and the manna being there. And they probably, remember, it was 40 years. Now, at that time, 40 years was probably almost 3 generations, because how people were breeding, you'd be what your grandfather, you'd have been going, yeah, Granddad talked about what it was like before the manna came, but it's just natural. The birds always fly, and the manna's always there. They'd have got complacent. So let's go to the next slide. Actually, I've done that bit. I think they forgot. I think people forgot just how glorious that miracle was, the miracle of being supplied with food and water every day. But we wouldn't do that, would we? We'd never make that mistake. We'd never be surrounded by a miracle that we forgot about and took God for granted, that we thought it was just natural. Well, I promised you a miracle. So this is the miracle. It's not just water, it's ice in water. We are surrounded by a miracle that shouldn't exist. It shouldn't exist. Think back to your O-level chemistry. When things get cold, gaseous space, in a gaseous state, what's happening is molecules are moving about, and they're going everywhere. They've got energy because they're warmed up, and they've got lots of energy, and so they separate out. And as it gets cold, the molecules stop shifting about so much, and they slow down, and they start forming structures, and they form crystals, and they either become a liquid. And when you get to that liquid, and you cool it down further, it becomes a solid, and it gets more dense. That is basic science. That is what happens. But that's not what's happening here. With water, you have something called the anomalous behavior of water. And I promise you, go onto the internet, type in the anomalous behavior of water, and you'll find we can't explain this. Yet this is absolutely what life on Earth exists for. The fact that ice floats, that ice is lighter than water, that defies all science. Science should tell you that actually when things get colder, they get more dense and they sink. That is what happens with every compound that we know of, apart from water. Water is anomalous and it floats. And without that, there would be no life on Earth. Without that, when it gets cold, the seas would freeze and life would die. The anomalous behavior of water is absolutely incredible. It is a miracle that we see every day and we forget. So, I come to my closing moments. I've got 3 sets of conclusions. The first one is Genesis chapter 1 is timeless. It is a perfect description of creation. It does not refute science. It aligns with the scientific story. See it through the eyes of a creator who was giving us a gift of telling us about his creation in a way that would be timeless. And that is a fantastic chapter. Second, the gift of knowledge, that ability to question. When you're surrounded by scientists who say, oh, this is all rubbish, glorify that, worship that, because the very fact that we have the ability to ask questions, to delve into data, that is a gift from God. And we shouldn't fight it, we should embrace it, because knowledge is a gift that God has given us. We're the only creatures that can look up into the sky and go, I wonder how far away that planet is. I wonder how far that star is. I wonder what direction that's going. We're the only creatures that can do that, and that is a gift from God. And finally, when you see water, that anomalous behavior of water, it is an absolute miracle. Praise be to God. Amen.